Good afternoon and welcome to the fifth module for the CCI Clearance Preparedness Program. The next and final module will be on April 22nd from noon to 1 p.m. Social media, what to consider in a virtual world. You all have received the calendar invite and you'll receive three reminders prior to the module. As a reminder, if you're using any AI tools, we will remove them immediately. We thank you for your understanding. As always, please email me with any questions about attendance and module logistics. I will turn this over to Dr. Eric Berger to get started on today's module.
Thank you, Kendall. So today, as promised, this is the fifth module in uh, clearance preparedness. And notice this when I say readiness. This module today, I'll say it up front, this is possibly the driest or could be the most interesting. Not as exciting as social media or drug use, but when you get a cyber job, you will be confronted with this question of who do I call? Something's happened. Who's responsible for doing things? Likewise, depending on where your job is, what are the parameters? What are the guardrails around your job? So we're going to talk about the rules and regulations and directives that govern cybersecurity in the federal government. And also, just as there are capture the flag exercises where you try to break into systems or protect systems, there are kind of on the policy side. For example, there's an event called Cyber 9/12, day after 9/11. And that's about, there's a cyber attack on the nation. How do we respond? There's certainly, it kind of mirrors CCI. There are certainly people behind screens. There are people coming up with novel and new tools and procedures, but there are also people figuring out, is this a job for the FBI or for the NSA? Am I allowed to share this information? Things like that. So we're going to talk about that today. So again, as the recap, hopefully today will also give you ideas of more cool places to work. It's again, not all behind a green screen. And as promised, next week or in 2 weeks, we're going to get to social media. Again, a reminder, if you have questions, there's a little Q&A box at the bottom. Feel free to type in there and I'll try to get to your questions at an appropriate point of time. Just as last time we were talking about your personal liabilities, again, now I'm talking about agency and corporate liabilities. So I'm not a lawyer. I'm not giving real advice here. Look to a real lawyer if you're in an agency, the general counsel or the general counsel's office for real advice because these things are changing. In fact, just this year, I had to revamp this entire presentation because there have been a lot of new laws and directives that have changed things. So how should we say? It's a big universe of departments and agencies. There are a lot of agencies that are involved in cyber. Uh, and right now, the most important one is Ghostbusters. No, actually, they're not an agency, but a lot of different agencies with a lot of different authorities. So who do we know who to call? Cybersecurity, it's hard to imagine it today, 30 years later, but cybersecurity came about in the federal government around HIPAA, around healthcare. We wanted to put electronic records online. We figured, wouldn't it be great if your general practitioner could know about a visit you made to a specialist. Your pharmacist could know about all the different drugs you're being prescribed. I can tell you from some of my own research, people are really bad at remembering their own medical history. So it wouldn't be great if that medical history was portable. So HIPAA was passed, and with that was the recognition, if we're putting this on a computer, then we ought to protect it. Uh, we also have the National Defense Authorization Act, also in 1996, which was saying, if we're putting healthcare records online, we got to put the government online as well. And so that's a lot of what happened there. And it was talking about, how does the federal government buy equipment? The big one is FISMA, which we'll talk about in a moment, which was applying to the civilian agencies. I do put up this NDA 2020 because I wrote part of this. And it's basically how do we protect 5G wireless networks? It was in the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. But again, it goes far beyond just the Department of Defense, Department of War's networks. So if we go back in time to 2002, FISMA was passed, and Title III of it says that OMB is responsible, the Office of Management and Budget is responsible to make sure that the agencies basically implement some sort of security. Now, of course, the director of OMB is not going to be walking around to the hundreds of agencies to make sure they're doing cyber. So basically, they delegate that requirement to the heads of each agency. Likewise, Secretary Litnick is not going to make sure the Department of Commerce is secure himself. He's going to delegate that to the agency's chief information officer. And realistically, that gets delegated to the agency's chief information security officer. What OMB does do, though, is they've created this council of federal CIOs where they get the CIOs together to trade best practices, to bring them up on uh, any new rules, regulations, executive orders. So we've got Office of Management and Budget overseeing federal civilian agencies. The Secretary of Defense oversees national security systems, except because of a historical way the CIA was formed, the director of the CIA oversees the CIA systems. So one question, and this is where we get to like a cyber 912 kind of thing, is what is a national security system? So we have a law for that. uh, and it's a specific definition. So it says if that system is being used by an agency and it involves intelligence activities. Well, that's kind of a clue. This isn't civilian. Includes cryptographic activities related to national security. Now, again, remember, this goes back to a law that was passed in 2002. At that time, we were still battling over whether encryption was a munition or not. So, exchange that with nuclear weapon. If something involves nuclear weapons relating to national security, you'd say, yeah, that sounds like national security related. So that's a bit where that comes from. Clearly, command and control of military forces, that's going to be national security. If it's part of a weapon system, national security. Or it's something, because B is about intelligence. What B is talking about is uh, it makes that distinction between, say, the CIA doing an intelligence activity, that's clearly national security, and the CIA's uh, expense reporting system. That's an enterprise application. Payroll, finance, logistics, personnel management. This paragraph B, which I don't show here, excludes those. But if it's in fulfillment of military or intelligence missions. For example, an expense report for how you bought lunch for a human intelligence source in a foreign country, we don't want that to be publicly available. That's still going to be national security information. So what do we do with these federal information systems? So the not national security systems. So again, OMB being the lead, the director of OMB being the lead person, they're responsible for making sure that these things called the Federal Information Processing Standards are followed, the FIPS, and they're created by NIST. And we're going to talk about that actually the very next slide. But before that, one of the things that OMB does is they create these circulars. A lot of the circulars are how do you do accounting? What's an expense? What's operations? What's capital? But they also have things like A130, managing information as a strategic resource. If you are going into especially a management role in the federal government, I would encourage you to look at it. But even if you end up in a private sector role, it's online. Just Google OMB Circular A130. It really has a lot of good guidelines on how to protect information in an enterprise. And it was, updated to reference the NIST framework. We'll talk about that a little later. So talking about the law that said we need a computer standards program. Well, this law said, okay, we have this agency in the US government, the National Institute for Science and Technology, and their job is federal standards. So, okay, NIST is going to be responsible for developing standards, guidelines, and minimum requirements for non-national security systems. We'll talk about the national security systems in a bit. Uh, but one of the important things that even was recognized in the law, categorize the system to determine risk-based appropriate levels of security. The system to protect the marketing website for the Department of Commerce, we do want to protect it because people do hack and deface websites. So, it needs some security, but it does not need the same level of security as, for example, the FBI's national crime database. That's a much, much higher level of security. Or looking inward, one of the most famous federal breaches, the Office of Management and Budget database, which, by the way, and I do see these SF-86 questions. I will get to them probably towards the end. But that's where they stored all the SF-86s that got breached. Clearly, the security requirements on that OMB database was much, much higher than the marketing outreach database for commerce because of all the harm, both to the individuals of having your personally identifiable information leaked, but also to the nation. That should have a much higher level of security. Working with the NSA, so just as NIST is responsible for non-national security system security, the NSA, National Security Agency, they are tasked with developing the national security system standards, and they are explicitly told, don't do the same thing twice. Share as much information and best practices and approaches as you can. One of the things that NIST did was the cybersecurity framework. Executive Order 13636, which came from the Obama administration, and the Cybersecurity Enhancement Act of 2014. They basically played kind of government legalese. They created a voluntary framework. to reduce cyber risks to critical infrastructure. So remember, NIST actually can't tell the private sector what to do. And for that matter, they don't really tell the federal government what to do. They tell the federal government what they should do. So here, it was a voluntary framework. But notice that the law was talking about, and the executive order was talking about critical infrastructure. So in the United States, most of our critical infrastructure is privately owned. The power grid, power plants, banks, water, and there's kind of a mix for like water treatment, maybe private, maybe municipal owned, sewers, same thing. But quite a lot of our critical infrastructure. In fact, now the internet is considered critical infrastructure because we run our government on it. So bad things would happen if the internet went away. But the internet is pretty much entirely privately owned. So what do we do? So we say, all right, look, we're going to have this voluntary framework. By the way, it'll be best practices, so we hope it spills over into the private sector. And what happened is, and we knew this was kind of in the plan, so like the Department of Energy said, hey, your power grid, you have to follow this. The FCC, in their regulated part, the Title II carriers, you have to implement this. The Securities and Exchange Commission, you're a public company, you have to implement it. We'll talk about what that really means in a moment. But the focus on critical infrastructure, because this is where the federal government has the authority to act. And again, that's what today is about, is what are the authorities. Now, the cybersecurity framework, it's actually pretty small and pretty high level. So there are different profiles for positioning, navigation, and timing. Different profiles for enterprise resource management, different federal agencies, manufacturing, Internet of Things. And by the way, this is kind of the basis for private sector cybersecurity initiatives. One of the reasons I got involved with the formation of the cybersecurity framework is when we talked about, for example, cyber threat intelligence sharing and companies sharing information with each other. A lot of companies didn't want to receive threat intelligence. And reason they didn't want to receive it was they didn't want to have to explain if they knew about a threat, why didn't they fix it before an attack happened? And there are kind of like two answers to that. One is because they were lazy, but the other is because they evaluated the threat with the panoply of threats they were faced. They felt that, yes, this is important. We'll get to it sometime. And they lost cyber roulette. The attack happened before they thought it would. So in the first case, they were not exercising due and reasonable care. In the second case, they actually were. And the reason that we worked on the cybersecurity framework, getting it written, was so that for the first case, in the negative sense, a company couldn't say, oh, we just don't want to know. Because the cybersecurity framework says you really should take part in information sharing. But it was also to protect the people who did their best. It's saying, well, here's kind of a benchmark for, we implemented the cybersecurity framework and North Korea hacked us. Most reasonable people would say, yeah, you did the best you could. You were doing due care. You got unlucky that a nation state went after you. So really, that was a lot of the driver. So that was released in 2014. There was an update in 2018. We now have Framework 2.0. And basically, yes, this was taken up by a lot more than just the regulated critical infrastructure sectors. So the framework 2.0 recognizes that. The other thing that it recognizes, again, we were hoping, and we were right. We were hoping that no one else had done cybersecurity requirements, and so we thought that if we had something that would spur other countries to do similar efforts. But again, kind of like the NSA and NSF, please don't do the same thing twice. A lot of governments basically said, do what the United States is doing and explicitly refer to the cybersecurity framework. So it is now pretty much a global standard. Uh, there are a couple of additions, but one of the things I wanted to point out, uh, I would again encourage everyone on here to Google NIST cybersecurity framework. It'll take you to the cybersecurity framework, landing page. Uh, this framework, it's grown dramatically. It's gone from 8 pages to 14 pages. And a lot of people think of, oh my goodness, cybersecurity framework, it must be hundreds of pages long. It's not. It's very high level, very easy to read. I know we have people at all levels of secondary education on the Zoom today. All of you would probably be able to, read it and understand what it's trying to do. But then remember, I mentioned that there were profiles for PNT, for manufacturing, for telecommunications. Those supplemental documents, they do grow to tens to hundreds of pages long. So, is NIST the only place for setting standards? Well, on the one hand, they are the federal agency tasked with standards, but they don't work in a vacuum. In fact, it's the law that says they have to talk to the other agencies that touch cybersecurity. And the idea is twofold. One is don't do the same work twice or 3 or 4 or 6 times, but also ensure that the civilian standards complement the national security systems. Make sure that we have the best learnings from national security systems applied to the federal civilian, because we need to protect our own networks. It's been long recognized that economic security is national security. So we really do not want to jeopardize our national and economic security. So NIST, it's not that they just published this cybersecurity framework and they're done, but they have authorities for helping agencies out. An agency says, hey, how do I do this? They can ask NIST for help. And NIST also is continuously doing research. So where can you go with your clearance? One of the places is NIST. The bulk of their research is not classified, but they also have some, because, if you're figuring out how to tear apart a system, that could be of grave danger to the United States. So they're basically the lead for federal information security research, but there are other agencies like CISA, DOE does cybersecurity research. It's kind of spread out all over. They're just the lead. NIST also runs this thing called the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, or NCCOE. And what they do is they actually are more conveners. So if you think of the cybersecurity framework, they had a lot of input from the private sector. I went to a number of meetings and submitted papers. And then that, became, with a lot of NIST expertise, that became the cybersecurity framework. NCCOE is pushing that out even further. NIST's role is to bring people together, but these documents are maybe edited by NIST, but they're really written by the private sector. And they're focusing on practical cybersecurity solutions. So they're connecting everyone together, and by everyone, it's industry, academia, and government to solve problems. And it's not just, oh, you should have an identity management system. It'll actually have, you should have an identity management system. Here's an example of one from Hewlett Packard, and here's how to configure it. So it's like, very specific. And so the idea is to explain how things work in the real world, in the real organization, and real sectors. And so this is the place where we kind of bridge theory to practice. Another thing that some of you may have been exposed to, uh, it's actually literally affects all of you. It's called the NICE framework. And this is the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education. So if you think of government jobs, they are, these well-defined boxes that people get put into. How do you define that box? Well, that's what this document does. So again, if you're curious about what kind of jobs are out there, take a look at this document. There may be jobs that, you're looking in USA jobs and you're like, oh, these jobs are kind of right for me. I don't quite fit. You take a look at this and you'll see, oh, that job description, that is me. That is what I want to do. That's what my experience is. That's what my education is. And then you can use that job title, that cyber position, to search for, kind of like that dream job for you. Um, and basically, what they do is they say, here are the kind of things that needs to be done. So then you kind of map the tasks and what skills do you need to do those tasks. So depending on what tasks fit in the role, that's what skills you need to have. Like the cybersecurity framework, which officially was just for the federal government and for the regulated industries, but very quickly got picked up by the entire economy. Same thing here. These job roles have been, picked up by the entire economy. So that we have, kind of the same names for what we publish in job descriptions. So now let's change gears a little bit. If you are in the federal sector, you get that cleared job in the federal government, not in the intelligence community or Department of War. So this is your federal civilian. Who do you call if there's, you're detecting a breach or you need help with a breach? You call the CERT function, the Computer Emergency Response Team within CISA. This is one of the recent changes. In 2023, CISA absorbed the functions of US CERT and the name. CISA was always given the CERT function in 2014. 2018. 2018 was when CISA was created. But they basically consolidated the face of it to the rest of the government in the world. Again, remember we were talking about NIST being the lead for like information security research. So you call CISA, you literally, send them an email, call them. They will consult with NIST because remember, NIST is the experts on this stuff, but CISA is handling the day-to-day triage. If you are the private sector, and remember we talked, there are cleared jobs in the private sector. If it's critical infrastructure, you call CISA because, it's federal agencies. And CISA itself, or DHS, actually has a lot of responsibilities for security and overall security, both physical and cyber, for probably about 18 of the 20 some odd critical infrastructure sectors. So if you're critical infrastructure, you'd call CISA. If Virginia Tech has a problem, actually kind of depending on the problem, we would call CERT CC. the coordination center. By the way, CERT CC predates US CERT CISA by 15, 20 years. It was stood up in the late 80s, early 90s. It's been run out of Carnegie Mellon, the Software Engineering Institute. And SEI is what's called an FFRDC, Federally Funded Research and Development Center. Another place where you can take your clearance or get a clearance would be to work at SEI as maybe an analyst. MITRE is another FFRDC that's pretty big in cybersecurity. Uh, there were issues with having to call different agencies and stuff. So PPD 41, Presidential Policy Directive number 41, is titled, United States Cyber Incident Coordination. So the idea is instead of having a whole bunch of agencies thinking they're in charge, or worse, a bunch of agencies thinking someone else is in charge, and so nobody does anything. This actually enumerated who does what and basically says for the private sector, the Federal Bureau of Investigation is the lead agency. This was triggered by an event called SolarWinds. The SolarWinds company was attacked with a supply chain attack. And it was a devastating attack. It compromised a large portion of federal systems as well as private sector systems. Back in 2016, when this happened, there was the Washington Post said, wow, there was this big meeting at the National Security Council. That was this. And what was decided was FBI leads, CISA is going to figure out what to look for and how bad it is. And then CISA will tell the public sector what to do. The FBI is going to do their criminal investigations. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence is going to bring the intelligence community resources to bear because a lot of these attacks are nation states. They're more than just criminal attacks, or they may be nation states backing a criminal attack. So the FBI will be looking at the criminal part, but the Office of the Director of National Intelligence is going to be bringing the intelligence community in to find out, what's going on and how to remediate it. So critical infrastructure, it's private but regulated. And that goes all the way back to the 1998 PPD 63 from the Clinton administration. And this basically enumerates who's covered, what is critical infrastructure. It created this thing called information sharing and analysis centers. That's a whole talk on itself, which I'd be happy to do, but not today. And it also created the National Infrastructure Protection Center. So, mostly CISA has, and DHS has these information sharing and analysis centers, and then we bring that up a level. So that was 1998. So by the way, that's before cyber was really a thing. Remember, 1998 was when we started talking about putting the government online. So this was kind of forward-looking. And then you can see, the Bush administration expanded on it, the Obama administration expanded on it, the Trump administration expanded on it. So one of the things that the Trump executive order did was it, kind of re-emphasized the federal obligations, but added that federal agencies have to use the NIST framework now. So that, believe it or not, before the Trump administration, that wasn't a requirement. And then again, encouraging, knowing that the regulators are out there, that critical infrastructure use it. This was driven by Mirai botnet. So that was driving a lot of the activity that was going on. And they actually said, really, private sector, we can't tell you what to do, but you should be transparent. If there's a breach, you really ought to tell people about it. And again, that got baked into some laws or leveraging some authorities that were already there in some laws like Sarbanes-Oxley and Gramm-Leach-Bliley. And that's like why the SEC has reporting rules now. Uh, there is what's called the National Cyber Incident Response Plan. It grew out of PPD 41. And this again is talking about pretty much breach notification. So you'll notice that if there is a significant cyber incident, which then gets further defined later, PPD 41 applies, and then the cyber incident response plan gets triggered. So we're not looking at your PC having a ransomware attack. That's significant for you. And I'm not trying to downplay that it's significant for you. Or if you're the victim of a scam and it cleans out your retirement, that's significant to you, but it's not quite significant to the nation. Um, and so one of the things that it did is it said, following the cybersecurity framework from NIST, it's not just one big and amorphous thing. There are three lines of effort. There's the threat response. How do we deal with this threat right now? There's the asset response. What is the impact to the assets that have been compromised? Is it our uh, banking system? Is it power not being delivered? Is it a transformer that's been blown up? And then it also says in the line of effort of intelligence, where is this attack coming from? Is it foreign agents? Uh, Basically, the 2024 response plan added that the affected entity, they have some roles, responsibilities, and how do they fit into uh, the response. It again made clear FBI is the lead. FBI does the threat analysis. CISA, is established as the lead for asset response, and ODNI, obviously, intelligence. Um, in 2016, it was all about the federal government, but then the realization it's a lot more than the federal government getting attacked. So coordinating with state, local, and tribal, the private sector, and international partners. It's a global problem, requires global response, and noting that the private sector is pretty important here because if it's critical infrastructure, it's owned by the private sector, but even if it's not, even if it's a manufacturing company, that could have bad effects for the nation, even if it's not classified as national security impacting. So, the importance of the private sector. Executive Order 1428 basically really accelerated intelligence sharing. Advanced technologies, some of you more on the computer engineering side or the computer science side may have been exposed to this concept called zero trust architectures, uh, and also kind of moving more and more federal systems to the cloud. And so creating this thing called FedRAMP, making it easier for companies to become kind of certified that they meet the requirements for the federal government and making it easier for the federal government to buy because then all the agencies don't need to do their own evaluations. Uh, do we think this is easy and obvious? If you thought it was confusing, let's look at what the Department of War does. Uh, this is one of those things where the Department of War, DOW, gives us a better acronym. Up until last year, this table was titled How to Build and Operate a Trusted DoDIN. which sounds kind of Tolkienian, but I much prefer to do win. We want to be on the winning side. So you'll see a lot of boxes in here. Let's kind of zoom in on kind of what's in here. What this table is saying is what are the authorities? Basically, who who set the rules for how to operate. Uh, this is actually a really cool document. It's a PDF, and you'll see, for example, under authorities, Title 50. Title 50 is intelligence community operations. Uh, that dashing, I didn't do that dashing. That dashing means that the reference was updated. You can actually click on all of these squares. It will bring you to the document, unless, of course, the document itself is classified. And if it is classified and you're on the high side, you actually, if you're authenticated, you can get the classified document. So a lot in the cyber realm, a lot of the federal government is very concerned about, is this something dealing with Title 10, which is a military operation, something that the Department of War is responsible for? Is it Title 50, something that the intelligence community is responsible for? Or is it Title 18, the criminal code? So, for example, you might have heard of the Foreign Intelligence, forget what the S is, Special Court, the FISA court. Um, the NSA, by law, because they are a Title 50 organization, cannot spy on American persons. So that's US citizens or permanent residents, green card holders. Uh, and that's in, Title 50. But if there's a suspicion that someone, a US person is breaking the law, then the FBI can get involved. The FBI is responsible for Title 18 criminal code. Likewise, overseas, is it a military operation or intelligence operation? That will dictate whether something is governed by Title 10 or Title 50. So this is a really good resource for, and again, more of like the Cyber 912 world of who's responsible for what and what are the authorities and what are the kind of the rules of the road. So, we talked about federal civilian systems. We talked about national security systems. There is an in-between, the classified systems. So, we want to share classified information. A lot of this comes as a result of 9/11, where different agencies had basically what, in retrospect, was enough information to figure out the plot to bomb the World Trade Center, to fly planes into the World Trade Center. But they either weren't allowed to share information, they didn't have the authorities, or they didn't know how to share information. So by 10 years later, the government said, let's figure out how we can do this. And again, the key terms I would say is this responsible sharing. So we don't want the NSA to spy on American citizens and then give that information to the FBI. That is excruciatingly illegal. But if the NSA receives information collected on either foreign persons in the United States, or they collect information outside of the United States, and there's an imminent threat going on in the US that will affect, be perpetrated by people in the US, we want them to share that with the FBI. We want them to share that with the Department of Justice to disrupt that activity. So a number of policies were enacted to kind of deal with this, classified information, but not national security information. If you thought there was a lot of people working on cyber, there's an agency called DISA, the Defense Information Systems Agency. The way I like to think of them, and again, this is the caveat emptor, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not telling you how the US government thinks of it, but the way I think of it is they're kind of a cloud provider. You can think of them as Google Apps plus Comcast plus Verizon for the Department of War. If a base commander wants to get telecommunications services, they uh, they could go directly to Verizon or AT&T, but what they're supposed to do, and nowadays they generally do, is they go to DISA and say, we need telecommunications service. And DISA does two things for them. They make sure that the connectivity meets the military requirements, and they also probably have a volume discount. So it's in everybody's interest to go through DISA. So their authorities, what's their job is providing enterprise computing to the Department of War, the applications, and connectivity. Now, of their budget, about three-quarters is, you could say, pass through, because when that base commander gets that Verizon service, uh, they're transferring money to DISA, and then DISA is, paying money to Verizon. But 25% is on services for the entire community, which includes research on security, research on how can we get efficiency by having the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Space Force sharing facilities, things like that. If there's crime, uh, in the and this is again the Department of War side, uh, it's the sorry, in the private sector, FBI. Again, they're the lead. We made that clear, and every administration since PPD 41 has reemphasized it's the FBI. If you go to ic3.gov, the Internet Crime Complaint Center, it's a place where let's say your PC is locked up with ransomware. That's someone you can call. They may or may not help you out, but if they get an awful lot of reports of people responding the same thing, then they can say, wow, this is really worth looking at, because now it's an attack on the nation. There have been a number of cybersecurity strategies. Uh, in the first Trump administration, there was kind of a focus on saying, hey, we got to figure out who's doing these attacks. 2018, the new cybersecurity strategy under the first Trump administration. Maybe we need to, do a bit of research. We need to figure out how we can both find out who are doing bad things, but also foster innovation, do research. In the Biden administration, they did the first comprehensive approach to cybercrime, and even though, well, I said it in the Trump administration, but Biden put it in writing. Cybercrime is a national security threat. Here we are, it's budget season. Uh, the amount of money lost to fraud in the United States, this is fraud to individuals, to seniors. In fact, we'll narrow it down. That amount of money, and right now we have an agency that's still not funded. The amount of money lost to fraud is about 8 times the DHS budget. That's a national security. What if we had that money in the economy? And likewise, just last month, the cybersecurity strategy for America was released. On the one hand, a lot of people made fun that it's 1/10 the size of the previous strategies. But what it really is doing, it's not saying, oh, those things are no good. Here's our brilliant thing. It really was just really focused messages on where we're putting effort. The previous strategy still is in force, but again, a focus on cybercrime and disrupting criminal networks. That's something brand new, never been in the cyber strategies. And so emphasizing law enforcement and partnerships with the private sector. Of course, Department of War always does its own thing. So instead of IC3, the Internet Crime Cybercrime Center, you can go to dc3.mil, which is the Department of Defense's Cybercrime Center. The forensics, not done by CISA. This is done by request by the Joint Advocate Generals or the agencies. They build their own tools, but again, they do work with FBI, CISA. There's a thing called the Defense Industrial Base Information Sharing Environment. And the Defense Industrial Base are the entities that you would expect, the RTXs and General Dynamics and Boeings of the world. Believe it or not, Virginia Tech is in the DIB because of some of the research we do. And of course, Department of War will work with and consult with the FBI. I'm sure that there's more, and there are things that are probably wrong. And given, like I just reported on something that came out about 3 weeks ago, some of this is going to be outdated, but again, it gives you kind of a background in the authorities. So saving the best for last, social media. We're going to talk a lot about a whole thing of social media, and it always generates good questions. So looking forward to that one. That one, sadly, will be our last lunchtime together. But I hope that this has been useful for you. I will make up for today because some of you, I hope to wake you up now with question time because it is kind of dry, but it's, about a year or two from now is when I get emails. Thank you, Dr. Berger, so much for telling us about this. It became really handy when we had this incident or in my job or whatever. I do have 2 questions in the chat. Again, I would encourage people to put their questions in the chat if they have any. So one question is on the SF-86 form. There is a section on employment. And, there is, you have to, give an unbroken list of what you were doing. And especially now, and we had this for people, around 2008, 2009. What do you do if you're unemployed? And there is kind of a box that's unemployed. So I'm going to give you the answer that I'm pretty confident is the answer. But again, if you have any questions, ask your security officer with the agency or the company that you're applying. In this case, it does not mean obtaining unemployment benefits. Obviously, if you're obtaining unemployment benefits, you had better be unemployed, otherwise you're committing a crime. But no, they're not looking for, are you officially unemployed? It means basically, are you between jobs for any reason? Because remember, they also ask, why don't you have a job? Were you laid off? Were you terminated for cause? Did you quit? And then there is that variation. In the private sector, it can be kind of a blessing. All right, I want to fire you, but, we don't want to say you're fired. So let's, make a deal. I'll, give you some good terms, but you go away and you quit. Well, government's pretty smart about that. So one of the options there is, did you have a negotiated settlement? And that's what that's talking about. So I hope that was helpful on the unemployment thing. Again, every month, as far back as it asks about, you have to have either you're in a job or 2 or 3, or you're working for yourself or you are unemployed. I will answer it, although I'm training people poorly. Someone put something into the chat. Please put it in the Q&A because my chat is actually someplace else and I'm more focused on the Q&A. But the question is, what if you were self-employed? That is one of the options, and there are instructions for how to fill in self-employed. So, for example, if you're self-employed, you're going to be asked to have one or two of your customers tell you, tell the government you were employed. So I consulted for a few years before I was full-time in academia. And I needed to get two of my clients to write letters saying, "Yep, Dr. Berger worked for us." Uh, Here's actually, one of those hard but good questions. And it's, if you had a family member who had joined the military to work for a cybersecurity position, and then they were kicked out of their position, can that affect your ability to get a clearance? Uh, I should probably put up a poll. What would Dr. Berger say at this point? What Dr. Berger always says, facts and circumstances. And not just facts and circumstances, but your facts and circumstances. You'll recall we had a person who worked at the CIA who had a family member who lived in North Korea that she hadn't seen for decades. Uh, did she get looked at a little closely? Yes. Did she get a clearance? She had a full career at the CIA. Yeah, so that wasn't uh, exclusionary. So likewise, if you had a family member that got kicked out, um, and by kicked out, I'm presuming a dishonorable discharge, um, that in itself wouldn't affect you. Now, if it's like your brother and they had a dishonorable discharge because you and your brother hacked the military computer system, then yeah, that's going to affect your ability to get a clearance. So it really comes down to your particular situation and the facts and circumstances of, if you were involved or if you were not involved. Last year, I had a question when we were talking about the drug use, and it was basically the question was pretty much everyone in my family has either been convicted or is still very much involved with dealing drugs. Well, if you're the odd person out in the family and you can demonstrate that you've been clean and you're not dealing drugs and all that, you'll probably get a clearance. If you're in the family business, you won't. So yeah, that's the answer to that. Any other questions? Please put them in the Q&A. Since we have all of 2 minutes, Kendall, why don't you do the close? And hopefully we'll be good.
That's all we have for today. We will see you for the final session on April 22nd, and I will give instructions during that module about badging. Again, if you all have any questions regarding attendance, you're welcome to shoot me an email. But if not, we will see you at the end of April. Thank you so much.